Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And it also makes me happy that my presentation is quite aligned with many of the ideas that we have discussed today. One of the key elements of my presentation is the focus on humans, and that's why it's called the human frontier. But before starting, and this has also been mentioned, we have a hard reality in Europe, which is the fact that we don't lead in AI, as all of you know. And this lack of leadership is in all fronts. So when we look at research, the European institutions are definitely not leading in AI. This is, for example, the institutions with the largest number of scientific papers in EURIPS, which is one of the best scientific conferences in machine learning in the world. And we can see on the left-hand side, the blue are the Chinese institutions. And we can see that they are dominating, something that didn't happen 5-10 years ago, followed by US institutions, then Asian, and then we have Europeans here in green. Curiously, the European ones are in the UK and in Switzerland, which is not strictly the European Union, but it's still Europe. The interesting thing here, as I mentioned, is also the growth in the number of Chinese publications, which has definitely grown exponentially. And right now, Chinese institutions and Chinese publications dominate all the scientific conferences in AI. Incidentally, I don't know if you read in the news that on Friday, Trump fired by email all the members of the scientific board of the National Science Foundation. And today, there was an article saying that they believe that maybe one of the reasons for the firing is because they were finalizing a report where they were providing all the data showing that China is leading in science as opposed to the US. And they think that maybe he didn't like that, and maybe that was the reason. So the reality is that, broadly speaking, China is leading in many areas, but in AI specifically, China is clearly leading. What happens in innovation? We have a similar situation. When we look at the number of patents, AI-based patents in the world, we see that China has the largest number of patents, followed by the US, followed by Korea, Japan, and then the fifth country is Germany, but the number is a couple orders of magnitude or more lower than the other countries. And the same in terms of investments. A similar situation we have in the context of deployment and use of AI. If we look at the top most valued companies in the world, we see that the top 6 companies are the American technology giants, and the most valued company that is in Europe, in the world, would be SAP in the position number 30. When we look at emergent companies, we see that the most valued emergent company is OpenAI, followed by Anthropic, Databricks, Cursor, and then we do have a European company, which is Mistral, which is the company that is building, I guess, the most competitive to date generative set of models, and is based in France. So this is sort of like the situation that we have. So obviously, Europe has to do something about this, because we also know that AI is at the core of the 4th industrial revolution and is significantly changing every aspect of society. So one of the main messages in my presentation is that to do this, we need to consider both the engines and the drivers. And I find that perhaps the public discourse these days is very much focused on the engines, but maybe not so much on the drivers. So the engines are the infrastructure, the compute, the data, the energy. We know that we need that to be able to train and deploy AI systems. But that is just a necessary but not like sufficient condition. And the key element from my perspective, and one of the biggest advantages maybe that Europe has, is actually on the drivers, on the talent, on the people. Because we do have great educational systems, and we have really talented people that we need to make an effort to retain. Plus, Europe is a great place to live, and we have a great potential to attract brilliant people that might be not so happy, in other parts of the world. So I think we really need to create programs for the talent, and that's one of the main messages. Another motivation for the talent is because the current paradigm in current AI methods has clear barriers and has clear limitations, that we need new talent to come up with new methods and new paradigms to really surpass these problems. So one of them is what is called the compute wall paradox. So as we are developing new generation of generative models, the needs in training costs are actually growing exponentially. And this is really not sustainable, because then we get a situation of sort of like marginal gains for really big costs in compute for training larger and larger models. A related topic, and it has been mentioned in the panel earlier, is the challenge of the data. This Nature paper shows the amount of available text on the internet, and this is the size of the training data sets for large language models. And as we see, we are very quickly running out of data. We don't have enough human-generated data to train larger and larger and larger models. And this is really creating a big challenge. As you might have read, and it's definitely a concern, generative AI companies are using the data of the conversations of people with their models to be able to have human-generated data to be able to train, larger models. But this is, reaching a real problem. One potential solution that is used is to use synthetically generated data to train the models. But there is the challenge of what is called the model collapse, where when you're using synthetically generated data to train models, then the whole cycle starts deteriorating, and at the end, the models, actually are not better, and they are not learning anything, meaningful. So the current paradigm of building larger models, using more compute and using more data, is definitely reaching its limits. And the third challenge, which is related, is the environmental wall. AI is anything but carbon footprint neutral. Training these models requires tremendous amount of energy. As you probably know, technology companies are buying micronuclear plants to be able to serve their energy needs. And it is expected that AI is going to be a huge contributor to the energy needs on the planet and, of course, to the CO2 emissions. So because of these three reasons, we need a new paradigm. And as I said, the inventors of these new paradigms in machine learning will be the new people. So we need to come up with methods that are efficient, that can learn from sparse, high-quality data instead of trillions of tokens, similarly to the way we learn. We also need to have ways of training these networks that are as efficient as biology. We humans don't consume these huge amounts of energy. Our brain doesn't consume these huge amounts of energy. So obviously, it is possible to build intelligence in a much more energy efficient way. But we need to invent that. And of course, we also need to have this human-centric approach where we are solving for key problems like causality, safety, and the alignment with our human capabilities, but also our well-being. A big challenge and a big area of interest in research is building multimodal models that have a representation of the world and also have knowledge about humans, so they are a lot more efficient, but also knowledgeable about what's factually possible or not, because they have this underlying world model. So just as a wrap-up of this part, of course, we need the hardware to be able to develop AI systems, but I think the more important part from my perspective is that we actually need to cultivate the people to be able to take us to the next frontier in AI. And one question might be, okay, so if we have all these people, we have great educational systems, we have brilliant minds, why is it that we have this weakness in terms of the talent? And it has been mentioned in the panel earlier, but the reality is there are barriers in Europe that are driving the top people away, the people that have many job offers and that they're not choosing to stay in Europe. One barrier is the salary gap. In the AI field, It could be 4x or more between being an expert in AI, in Europe versus working for a US technology company. We have the bureaucracy gap. So a lot of the top talent, especially scientists, spend 25% or more of their time in bureaucratic tasks, writing grants, justifying public money. Basically, most of the time is spent either explaining what you want to do next or justifying what you did, and there is almost no time to actually do something. So that's definitely a deterrent for a lot of people. And we don't have big technology companies in Europe, as I showed in the earlier slides. And for a lot of people, it's very attractive to work in the leaders. And the leaders right now are these technology companies. So, talent is a magnet for other talent. And if the top people are working on those companies, the top people in Europe also want to work there. Another interesting source of unbalance in Europe is this sort of like old economy versus new economy allocation. So 48% of the people that work in the technology sector in Europe end up working what is called sort of like old technology industries, like traditional manufacturing or traditional banking, whereas 54% of the same profiles in the US work in digital native companies, which are a lot more attractive, for young people. To mitigate this challenge in terms of talent, particularly in the context of research, in 2019, a number of scientists working on machine learning got together, including myself, and we created the ELLIS Society. And the goal for the ELLIS Society is to create an environment that is sufficiently competitive to be able to attract and retain the next generation of brilliant scientists here in Europe. In these years, since the spring of 2019, ELLIS has really become one of the leading voices in Europe in research in AI. We have more than 1,500 members. Everybody has to be a scientist working on machine learning and related topics. We have more than 550 ELLIS fellows and ELLIS scholars. These are the top scientists that have been evaluated by international committees and that have the level of excellence that ELLIS aims to have here in Europe. We have 41 ELLIS units in different European countries. We have 2 ELLIS institutes, and we also have captured significant money from the European Commission in the form of European projects. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention because I think it's a very promising initiative to be able to retain, also educate, because ELLIS has a very competitive PhD program, and there are more than 500 ELLIS PhD students and postdocs that are now doing their PhDs or have done their PhDs here in Europe in the past few years. So from my perspective, the roadmap to have this talent sovereignty is investing in, the top people, investing in attracting, scientists, in educating, scientists in AI, removing the barriers and the friction, removing especially the bureaucracy is very high for scientists, especially, if they have public grants. Reward the excellence. This is a big challenge. We don't have competitive salaries in Europe. And also, establishing these new lines of research that I mentioned, as the next generation of AI. So this is the first part about the human sort of like elements. And then, of course, we have the governance aspects that have been mentioned earlier. And because the focus of this session was a lot on the use of AI in the public sector, I thought it was also interesting to have very quick, thoughts about this topic, and what the opportunities are. So using AI and embedding AI in the public sector is a tremendous opportunity. And Europe has a very strong public sector. Most of the European countries have really strong public administrations that provide a lot of the benefits that we have, because we live in Europe. We have very good healthcare, we have very good education. We have very good digital, public services and so forth. So there are a lot of opportunities in making all of these more efficient and better with AI. So one area of opportunity is in terms of detecting corruption and fraud through the analysis of data automatically using, machine learning algorithms. There is a lot of opportunities in the context of urban planning, urban management, smart cities, traffic, energy grids, and so forth. And there's a lot of projects already on this topic. Of course, there is the opportunity of efficiency. It has been mentioned earlier. Public civil servants have to do a lot of routinary, data-related or document-related tasks that can be quite easily automated or semi-automated with the help of AI. And then we can also personalize a lot of the services that we provide, and we can also make them more accessible to all types of citizens that we might have. One study, for example, found that if in Italy they would adopt AI in some of the public service provision areas, so they could actually have an 11 billion savings because of the use of AI. So there is an economic incentive to do this. But of course, there are also many challenges, and they have been discussed some of them here earlier. A very important challenge, and there has been a number of cases in European countries related to this challenge, which is the challenge of bias and discrimination. The fact that data-driven machine learning algorithms, in many cases, not only learn existing patterns of discrimination in society, but in many cases magnify them and amplify them. So if we are going to be relying on algorithms to make decisions about who receives a certain social benefit or who is admitted in a certain program, we need to make sure that those algorithms are not going to be discriminating. It has also been mentioned before, the challenge of cybersecurity and safety and robustness. So the public administration is a classical target for cyber attacks because of how valuable all the data is and because of how disruptive it can be if the attacks are successful. So of course, safety is a key element, and if the public administrations rely more and more on AI algorithms, we need to make sure that they are secure and safe. There is the challenge of privacy and surveillance, the unethical or inappropriate use of private data, but also the massive potential for massive surveillance when all this data is potentially used by different governments or public administrations. There are legal, and ethical challenges. It has been mentioned many times, the AI Act and the different regulations, and that's obviously a challenge. And then it has also been mentioned, and I think it's a very critical challenge, is the challenge of education. The necessary investments to teach the different, digital skills to civil servants, that they can actually embrace, this technology. They cannot see it as a threat, but as an opportunity, to do more interesting things with their lives than just being sort of like a human robot, mindlessly typing, stuff that, an algorithm could do a lot easier. This is just some figures just to show the potential of the benefits that the use of AI in different countries for different purposes of the public administration, what kind of benefits they have brought. And, there are benefits in these cases in the reduction of corruption, for example, where in Italy is a big decrease, according to this study. There are many examples on the use of a variety of tools, for smart cities, for traffic prediction, for optimizing energy, for monitoring, pollution, for managing better, the entire infrastructure in the cities. And of course, Estonia is one of the landmark countries in terms of digitization and AI use, because they are very strong on having everything in digital form. And then they had this objective of developing the new skills for 100,000 citizens of the country, which is not a very big country, so it's a relatively significant percentage, to really educate broadly their society. This is an example of the use of AI in the context of public health, and this is actually a project that I led during the pandemic. So in the Valencian region of Spain, I led a team of over 20 scientists, and we worked very closely with the decision makers. In this case, it was the government of the Valencian region. And for over 2 years, we held them in making better decisions regarding which interventions to implement to contain the pandemic through the use of AI and data analyzed with machine learning algorithms. We developed sophisticated computational epidemiological models and we also did policy simulations of what would happen if I close the schools, what would happen if I don't allow travel, and so forth. That would be helpful for, deciding the cost and the benefit of the different measures. We analyzed, aggregated, anonymized mobile data to understand whether the containment measures were actually having any kind of impact or not, and if people were actually complying. And we also deployed a really large citizen survey with more than 700,000 answers that help us week by week have an understanding of the impact of the pandemic on people's lives and also on how compliant they were with the different measures. This experience had real impact in about 5 million people, which are the people in the Valencian region, but also our computational epidemiological models and our simulation environment were the winners of the XPRIZE Pandemic Response Challenge, which was a global challenge on the use of AI to fight the pandemic. And I think that was really exciting because it was the first time in the history of XPRIZE that a team from Spain won the competition against teams from the US, Canada, Australia, like many different parts of the world. So that was really motivating for the team, to see that we were doing work that was in the frontier of what, the rest of the world was doing. This has already been mentioned, the AI Act. I'm not going to go into detail, but it is very relevant in the context of the public sector because many of the public sector use cases are high-risk use cases. So all the requirements on the AI Act in terms of high-risk systems apply, in the context of the public administration. And then to wrap up, I wanted to talk about another key dimension, which is the social factor. Because we might have the technology, we might have the people that are developing the technology, we might have maybe, public administrations that really want to deploy the technology, but ultimately we need society to also be able to understand the technology and embrace it and feel that it's actually having a positive impact, on their lives. And to do that, we need to overcome a number of social-related barriers of these systems, and this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other limitations, but these are some important limitations. I mentioned it in the context of the public administration, but more broadly speaking, in the context of society, the limitation of today's systems in terms of their biases, their stereotyping, and their discrimination is a key social barrier. If people feel that they are being discriminated against, or if they feel that these algorithms are magnifying existing patterns of discrimination in society or stereotypes in society, obviously, they are not going to be very happy, having this technology being, pervasively used. As I mentioned also in the context of the public sector, for society at large, potential privacy violations, inappropriate use of personal data is a key concern. At the same time, many people are happily disclosing very private information to chatbots without much of a worry about the fact that that private information is probably going to be used to train the next generation, and these systems memorize. And there are examples of the systems spitting out literal private information because they memorize the information, during the training phase. Another big challenge is the challenge related to autonomy. What happens to us humans when we increasingly delegate decisions into these systems? What happens with our own abilities? What happens with our ability to have critical thinking? What happens with our ability, to be, maybe creative? What happens with our ability to face, a blank page? We all hate maybe a blank page, and it's very easy because you can ask any chatbot, to create a text for us. But the learning happens in the friction. The learning happens when you overcome these difficulties. So what happens if we stop learning? Because we actually don't have that friction anymore. This, for me, is a very important, social concern. Of course, we've talked about this. These systems are not factual. They haven't been trained with an objective function related to veracity, and factuality. And of course, you can also use them to create content that looks real, but is completely, synthetic. Just to give some figures, there has been a 3 times increase in deepfake fraud incidents in the past year, and the public distrust in AI decision-making is very high because, partially because of this issue in terms of veracity, and creating fake content. So to address these issues and other issues, and to contribute to the challenge of talent, One of the ELLIS units in the ELLIS network is the ELLIS unit in Alicante that I created and that I direct. And it's called the Institute of Humanity-Centric AI because it has as a goal to really make sure that AI will be positive for society. We articulate this mission. Oh, this is our lab. We are in by the harbor in Alicante, so I encourage you to come visit us if you are interested. And we work on 3 research areas. The first one is called AI to understand us. And here we build computational models of human behavior, always with the purpose of helping people and social good. The second one is called AI that interacts with us. And here we study human-AI interaction, but also we develop new intelligent interactive systems. For example, we are just finishing an educational chatbot that fosters critical thinking by applying the Socratic method of asking what is called critical questions. So instead of providing all the answers, the system asks the right questions so the person, the user, will actually think about what the answer is. And the last area is called AI that we trust. And here we investigate and we aim to mitigate a lot of the limitations of today's AI systems, like discrimination, bias, stereotyping, violations of privacy, manipulation, opacity, and so forth. Just to illustrate, these are some of the projects that we work on. I won't go into detail, but just to illustrate an example, we are one of the pioneering groups in the world that has studied beauty filters. I don't know if you know what beauty filters are, any of you? You are not the demographic that uses beauty filters. They are very much used by young girls and teenagers, to the point that I don't think there is a selfie that is uploaded to any social network in that demographic group that hasn't been beautified by a beauty filter. These beauty filters are a cause of great concern, both in terms of the mental health of the girls, but also there hadn't been any work until we did this work in understanding what these beauty filters do. So we published a number of articles about this, and they were very well received in the world. But also, several months after we published our last article about this, both TikTok and Meta decided to regulate or to ban the use of beauty filters. I'm not going to say that it's because of our research, but I do want to believe that we contributed to a better social understanding of what the limitations and the risks are, and we contributed, to really raising, more awareness about this challenge. In ELLIS Alicante, we are trying to do something that is very unusual in Europe, which is having a public-private funding model where we are encouraging to have philanthropy for research. Not very common here, very common in the US, and a contributor to the fact that the US is so strong in science. So we have public funding, but we also have funding from foundations, companies, or people that believe in our mission and that want to support us. So as a close-up, I would say, let's invest in humans because the rest is just hardware. Thank you very much. And if you want to know a little bit more about AI, I have this second edition of my book that was just published last week. Thank you. I don't know if there's time for questions or...
Maybe one question?
Some question.
Who wants to have the golden question?
Hello, I'm Alberto Ruiz, the Director General for Industrial Programs in the Ministry of Industry here in Madrid. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very useful. I just have a very short question. So, you've mentioned in your presentation the EU AI Act, and in other slide there was this ranking of AI companies in which it shows that American companies are on top and European companies are not so well positioned. In which ways do you think the AI Act can help us grow and can help us position our companies better?
Yeah, so, I always say good regulation is a great incentive for the right innovation, because it's what steers innovation in the direction of what the society, that has passed that regulation believes that it should be. But bad regulation is a great impediment, to innovation. So I think in the context of the AI Act, I think we still have to see, because it hasn't really been, fully, deployed, to which degree it falls into the category of good regulation in the sense of being a tool for certainty because that's very important to have regulatory certainty, so you know the rules of the game, but also for ensuring that there is an alignment between where the development in terms of innovation is going and deployment and what the expectations of society are and what the demands of society are. So we don't know yet, but what I think is clear is that the situation that we have had until now of a completely unregulated environment is not good for society at large. And we are seeing this with the numerous lawsuits and fines that the technology companies are involved in, or fines that they have to pay because of negative impact on people, or in the case of Europe, because violations of the Digital Services Act, for example. And almost every day there is some news on Meta especially being found that is not complying with some Digital Services Act requirement. So we will have to see. I think the positive element of regulation is the creation of a certain environment, an environment where everybody plays by the same rules and we know the rules. And the creation of rules that we know will be in alignment with what society anticipates and expects, because as I mentioned, the societal impact is very important. We need to be able to deploy technologies that people accept and that people value and that people believe will be good for them. There's no point in developing technology that will be bad for us. I mean, why would we do that, right? So we will have to see. The fact that the leading technology companies are American companies, I don't think is orthogonal to the AI Act, because there was no AI Act when any of these companies were created. There are many other factors and reasons why there is this leadership in technology, in technology companies. But I think the hope is that maybe European companies will be better prepared, to be compliant with the AI Act, and that might be a competitive, advantage for European companies. I think we will see. But what it is different today compared to 20 years ago is that there is a lot more social awareness than 20 years ago on the negative impact of technology. Perhaps there is too much of a negative perspective from my view, and that's why many times I also say AI has a tremendous potential for having positive societal impact, because we won't be able to have precision medicine without AI. We won't be able to have personalized education without AI. We won't be able to have efficient renewable energy without AI, and so forth. So we need AI. It's not that it's all bad about AI, because sometimes the headlines are so negative that I feel people might wonder why we're doing this if it's so bad. So we know we need it, but we also need to make sure that the collateral damage, and the unintended negative consequences are as small as possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nuria, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.